alkaloids from the plant material, and you can activate those alkaloids, making them bioavailable medicinally. And what's really great about this is it took all this biomass. What we extracted here was from about 1.25 pounds of biomass, and we got it down to a pretty small amount, which is really great for shipping and storage. Typically, extraction processes will sanitize the product as you're extracting it. So, for example, using Everclear kills everything that it touches, right? And so this client is trying to make edibles, and we're going to further process these extracts for edibles. All right, go ahead. So a lot of what I've been doing this year has to do with pests, identifying them and creating plans to eradicate them, integrated pest management plans, where we can have an organic approach to removing these pests, preventing them in the first place. And there's a lot of exciting techniques for that. So I got a grant from the state. I'm very thankful to them to get this microscope. And it has a camera on it, and so I'm able to take high-resolution images of samples that I collect from different farms, as you can see. And I seal them off because I don't like to spread potential contaminants. And you'd be surprised, you can see some pests, but most of them you cannot see. This is a 4,000x magnification. This is not my image, but this is some electron microscope imagery of powdery mildew. And this is some powdery mildew. I'm sure everybody who's grown cannabis has seen powdery mildew at one point or the other.
Can the powdery mildew, can it be airborne too, or just?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's a spore reproducing fungi, and so they will make little spores and go into the air. And essentially, it's all over all of us. It's all over the soil, all over the earth. It's in the atmosphere. It's everywhere. And so you're really not going to grow cannabis without it unless you're in a laboratory pristine condition. What you can do is give the plant microbes that are beneficial to it that will fight off that pathogenic fungi. Okay, so you want to promote the beneficial microbes. One I've been reading about recently too, actually I want to talk to you about, are really fascinating. So there are some bacteria which have evolved and adapted specifically to eat that fungi, okay? And so if you can make it an environment that is good for that bacteria and inoculate the plant with that bacteria, you can kill this fungi. They'll just eat all of it, right? You can also do techniques like physically removing infected leaves. If it's that gone, take it off your plant, of course. Even if it's like a third that gone, I would rip it off, right? That being said, it's not just on the outside. It will go into the vascular system of the plant and go throughout the entire plant anyway, right? So there's nothing you can do except for give it microbes that can fight it, that eat it, right? That's the best thing you can do. And there are actually products available specifically for that if you look for them. Another one that I'm really loving is a bacteria that evolved to eat chitin. Okay, chitin is what the cell membrane of insects are made out of. Okay, and this bacteria eats chitin. All right, and so what you'll see is, you'll get mites, you'll get aphids, and they'll be there. You'll see them, and then you'll see a bunch of dead bugs all over the place, and that's awesome. That's what you want, is dead bugs, right? All right, go to the next slide. Look at this demon face right here. that was from kind of down by where you are, actually. And so these are some pests I've taken pictures of this year. And I'm really lucky to be involved in the scientific academic community at UVU. I have access to a lot of biologists. Some of them are entomologists, professionals who have been able to help me to identify a very specific pest. And that's important because if you don't know exactly what it is, it's nearly impossible to remove it organically. Different mites have different behaviors. You remove different mites differently. Some of them are tens of thousands of times the size of other mites, right? And they all have different behaviors. And for example, this is just a little silkworm, horrifying creature. All right, will you go to the next one?
Hey, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So the chitin eating, what was that?
Bacteria.
Bacteria?
Yeah.
Would that also have the possibility of killing your beneficial bugs as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a last resort,
Yeah.
but as opposed to spraying synthetic chemicals that the plant
Well,
and humans can't metabolize.
Yeah, we had a lot of ladybugs last year.
Yeah,
So
I love
I don't want
ladybugs.
to do anything to give them any.
Yeah. There are actually companies who are specifically breeding, and I can provide you guys some information on this. They're breeding just predatory insects of a variety of types. So essentially, you can try to identify or send them samples of or pictures of pests, and they will say, okay, this insect is the one that will eat that. We're going to ship you some. And so ladybugs are awesome, but they can only eat certain sizes of insects. If they're too small or too big, they can't eat it. Same with like praying manti. You know, praying manti can't eat teeny little mites because they can't catch them, right? And so there's a different predator for every insect, and that is the best approach. You are right, the bacteria will kill beneficials. Yeah, so what we typically do is waves, you know, beneficial insect, predatory, insect pathogenic
What was the other-
microbes.
What were the other?
I use pirate bug.
Pirate bugs, yeah.
Pyre bugs?
Pirate.
Pirate bugs, okay. I have to see the Latin name. I have a big list of them. But what do you use those for?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah?
I just use them.
We use, it was our,
Pirate bugs, ladybugs, and praying mantis, and,
yeah.
That's
It
a
was
good
our,
combo.
and guinea hens.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, chickens and hens, they'll pick at your plants. Ducks, people are having a lot of luck with ducks because they don't care about the plant at all. They just want the bugs and then they run off. And so I know a lot of people who are doing cannabis agriculture who have ducks on the property, and they cycle them between different locations. I had to put up this slide because these are some cool mutants that I was exposed to this year. So
Yeah, we did.
you can see polypoidy is what this is called. And I'm still a student, still learning about it, but what I understand is that it has 2 full sets of DNA, which is super interesting because it actually has, in every position that there's a leaf, there's 2 leaves, for example. And it's almost growing into itself. And if you ever find a fat stem like this,
We have one of those.
Yeah.
and
Do
it's
ya?
the coolest
Yeah,
thing.
it's a
I thought
mutant.
I needed to put it in a case or something.
yeah, they are unique. I like to document them. And what I'm seeing is that this is potentially a byproduct of feminization. So the companies that are feminizing seeds are, or even the genetics of the plant are having this mutation as a byproduct. And then this is called fasciation, and it's really interesting because it's a genetic disorder with the chloroplast of the plant. So it's not photosynthesizing correctly, which is why it's white. But interestingly, the gene associated to this mutation is also associated to the biosynthesis of alkaloids. And so you'll actually get some really strong concentrations out of these guys, even though chunks of them are white, which is, I think, pretty cool. They are very susceptible to fungal mildew pathogenic infection. Their nugs are very dense, which means that there's not oxygen in the center, and oxygen is what kills that fungi. And so you have to be very careful with them. Typically, you want to break them up while they're drying to prevent that powdery mildew growth if you do have
I
one.
think we might have got rid of a few of them.
Yeah, people don't like them. I don't know why. I think they're cool. All right, what did you... So, we're near the end here. I just like to talk about how cannabis is a solid investment. Historically, this is the best timeline I could come up with. Cannabis has been cultivated since before written history, going way, way back. And essentially, as humans made it through Asia evolutionarily, as we transitioned into other continents, that's where we came across cannabis, and from there started selecting its traits. Originally it was for fiber and food, and it wasn't until pretty recently in history that it was really focused on for medicine. And in recent time, I did a market analysis consultation for a client. They were trying to figure out what to do with what they were growing. They didn't really have a lot of direction on that. So I took a look at the market and market transform. And interestingly, this blue line on top is tinctures. This black line on the bottom is oils, okay? And so these are market projections that are produced using the data from, I think in this study, they accumulated the data from the last, I think this one was 15 years, I'd have to look at it. Anyways, tinctures are going to be a leading trend because the alcohol in the ethyl extract, it can activate some of the alkaloids, making them bioavailable more quickly. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. As opposed to an oil. So a good example is that if you're consuming an oil, that it takes about 45 minutes for you to metabolize, okay? An ethyl extract, a tincture, it takes about 15 minutes. So it's active far more quickly, which is very, very appealing. Also, it's an easy to manipulate state when you have an ethyl extract. You can reduce it into a distillate and a concentrate and an isolate at that point. All right. Okay, this is my card that I brought today for everybody, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys for coming. Do you have any questions?
What's next for you, my friend?
Oh, I didn't talk much about that, huh? So this year I am trying to start a soil production business. As I said, cannabis agriculture, it's all about the soil, and I've developed a technique where I can culture the beneficial microbes from the cannabis microbiome in the soil, on the plant, and inside of the plant, and I can get rid of the pathogenic microbes and essentially come up with an inoculant that I can put in a soil anywhere in the world to enable the soil microbiological community to assist the plant in nutrient uptake and adapting to its environment. So soil production is going to be big for me this next year.
How do you apply that?
How do you apply it?
Yeah.
So you have to have the right substrate. I like compost. There are different kinds of compost. They have different effects. I like to take that as my base mixture and amend it with things like coconut coir, sphagnum moss, perlite, vermiculite, rock wool, things like that, the aeration and a little bit of conductivity, cation exchange conductivity, so you can hold on to water a little bit. And essentially you're trying to create an environment where the microbes are happy, where you have oxygen, where there's gas exchange. And if you do that, if you remember that you're growing microbes, not just a plant, you'll be a lot more successful in your agriculture. One thing I skipped past that motivated me to get into this industry was I worked with a medical patient in Colorado. Her name was Grace, and when I met her, she had multiple neurodegenerative diseases, and I came over because their grow was infected with powdery mildew. They wanted to see if they could fix it. The answer is no. Once powdery mildew is in your cannabis, it creates mycotoxic compounds, and those can't be removed from the plant material and separated from the alkaloids. And so, yeah.
Have you heard about the blue light technology that they use for getting rid of PM, powdery mildew?
Yes, and while the radiation, the ultraviolet radiation will kill the powdery mildew, what it won't do is remove the mycotoxic molecules left. So essentially you're talking about the waste of the mildew itself. And as it metabolizes the carbohydrates, that waste it puts out is definitely toxic to humans, and there is no method that you can use to remove it. I've had people suggest soaking it in Everclear, in ethanol, and that won't separate it from the alkaloids. You'll just have an extract that's contaminated.
Right.
And so prevention of powdery mildew is essential. You don't want to give something that's contaminated to someone who is terminally ill. You don't want to be the cause of death for someone's grandma, you know what I mean? And we have a responsibility in this industry to be sanitary and to promote those ideals. I think that's really important to me. I'm a chef, so clean, Yeah.
So my question is with the plastic culture to offset the humidity, low humidity here in Utah. Is there other organic alternatives?
Yes, actually my favorite are cover crops. I love talking about this. Companion planting with cannabis is super cool. So clover varieties, they've evolved to create nodules, to do nodulation, where essentially they cultivate and harbor phosphorylizing and nitrogen fixating bacteria inside of the nodules, which will make it so that, let's say for example, you have a form of nitrogen that is not a bioavailable to the plant, like N2, just atmospheric nitrogen, or ammonium. And what plants need is nitrates and nitrites, right? And so what that bacteria will do is it'll take those two forms of nitrogen that the plant can't use and turn them into a form that the plant can use, right? And so by having that cover crop, not only are you helping with the nutrients of the plant, you're actually preventing physically new weeds from infecting it, and the clover will also help to hold in humidity and create an environment where worms can thrive. Worms are good in your gardens. Red wigglers are awesome. But yeah, if you combine different organisms that are beneficial to the environment of the plant, you're really growing an environment, not just a plant. And if you grow that environment will take care of the plant for you. And the biggest growers that I've met in California, for example, they all use like clover, little companion plants. Some are experimenting with different types of plants to see how they affect them. Typically, you don't want a plant that has too big of a root system. You want kind of the little stringy plants that aren't predatory towards other plants. But I think it's really exciting research, and it's the only way to do, no-till, sustainable, year-round living soil is to have those other plants with your cannabis. Yeah, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been told that the plastic cover will stunt your growth. It
You're
can
right.
stunt your growth.
Because it will cut off oxygen to the microbes and the plant roots, right? And that's critical. So a lot of people will actually permeate the holes a little bit, but having that physical barrier, it's really the only way to keep the moisture in, with the exception of having high quality soil composition. And so if you have, we call it cation exchange capacity, or I'm forgetting the term, PKN, it's the opposite of, I'm gonna say it wrong, so I'm not gonna say it. Pretty much if you're using very organic soil, it will hold on to a lot of moisture. Too much moisture is bad because then you won't have enough oxygen, but if you don't have enough organic matter in the soil, it's just going to evaporate away. Half my clients this year planted in Utah soil had very, very low yields, and we're talking like an eighth of a pound, a quarter of a pound on plants that had the genetics to produce over a pound in this short outdoor Utah season. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, I can ramble a little bit.
Would you wanna do the plastic with the clover, or you would do one or the other?
If I could choose, I would always do clover. Plastic culture is definitely a better option for some people. If you have your own establishment, go with sustainable clover, right? But if you're just leasing a place for the year, probably plastic culture is a good idea because you're really amending soil that might not be very good. A lot of the clients I've had, they grow in the Utah soil here and they're not getting very much production because once you add water into that soil, it locks up, it becomes cement, and then the roots can't grow, your plants can't get big.
One of our problems is that all of a sudden the weeds were taller than the plants.
Yeah, I've got a picture on one of my slides of a
And
weed that's
so-
bigger than the
and
weed.
when you said like the dirt can become like concrete,
Yes,
out there trying to weed
that's
that
actually the
stuff.
recipe. If you go out on the west side of Utah Lake and you get out of your car and you'll step on the ground, you'll think that it was made by humans, but it was actually a natural formation of the lake because of the composition of the soil and the moisture, and it literally makes concrete. And so amending the soil here is critical. I would max out at 5% native soil if you can. It's really meant to
What
act as like a bed, if anything.
If we're planting like 10 acres, that's kind of hard to change
You're right, yeah.
all your, but you can.
It is super hard. So and I think I've run into you guys, a couple times, and you guys are doing long-term stuff. I think if you planned to use your waste wisely, you could create your own compost over time from that waste. You can continuously amend into the soil. Yeah.
We didn't know that the stems were that good either until.
That's
this
tall.
season.
Yeah.
You didn't know it was what?
The stems, like,
Yeah.
we were shucking them all in. the
Oh, yeah.
companies.
Well, there's
And-
companies right now looking to buy fiber,
Yeah.
Or the plant material to process.
It was like $2 a pound, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking at least it's gonna be used
Yeah.
to something.
And you really should, and if you could at least wood chip it into a pile that you compost, that's made of what the plant eats,
Well, we have a lot of compost, or not compost, but.
We have the
all
stems.
fiber.
I'm not taking anyone's time, am I?
No,
Okay.
you're the show, bro.
Well, thanks.
We'll get some industrial
He's gonna grab some hemp.
Woo!
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope he's got a transportation permit for that.
Oh, we all do. Yeah, I know there's a big facility starting in Utah County this next year where the entire thing's gonna be made out of hempcrete, which is really cool, and another hemp material whose name I can't remember. But they're gonna do a lot of cultivation, indoor and outdoor, and it's super exciting. I grew up here. I'm from Utah. I grew a lot in other states, but it's really cool to see, you know, the changes that it has on the culture here.
This is some
So-
Hawaiian hemp grown out of St. George, so that is, you can definitely open it up and take a smell.
Nice.
You get some awesome terpenes, and yeah, Utah is going to be known as the hemp capital of the world just because of our
It's a new
local
oil company, right?
See if you can guess what
our
terps
weather
are in
conditions
there.
and everything out here are just
Joe, show the camera.
plants, so.
If I could guess, do I get to keep it?
Ah, it's not a jelly bean jar.
Smells good.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So with our high clay soils out here, I read somewhere, you know, the gypsum is something that can be utilized to kind of combat.
Yeah.
Clay.
Yeah.
And that- so you can actually be able to get, you know, moisture and stuff.
Yeah.
into the seeds. Is that something that cannabis, do we know if it's something that it would react to negatively, or you can?
There's a lot of variables to that question, okay? So, firstly, soil science is super complicated, one of my biggest passions. And the more I learn, the more complicated I realize it is, okay? And with clay, there's multiple types of clay. Some of them expand, some of them don't. They behave differently, right? Also, how they interact with other particles is different, okay? So the gypsum is silica, right? A huge percentage of the earth is made out of silica. One of the best organic practices you can use for like pest control is to have silica in your soil. If the plant takes in silicates, it becomes a part of the sclerenchyma of the plant, the cells that contribute to the structure in the plant anatomy. And when insects eat that plant, it's like eating glass. And so far, that's been the least costly and the highest impactful method I've suggested to clients for pest removal this year. Everyone I've had do it didn't have any major issues with bugs. And you can get it in a granulated form. You can mix it into your water. To tie that into what you were asking a little bit, you can aerate the water that you're feeding into your drip system in the plastic culture, and that introduces oxygen as well. Yeah, it's a good way to keep
I
it
put down
oxygenated.
1,000 pounds per acre of gypsum.
Yeah, that's funny because there's gypsum mines here in Utah.
Yeah.
You know, lots of them actually. Yeah, and so we have a lot of gypsum here, and that's great. The clay, it can be bad. Like if it's not a shrink swell clay, right? That means that it doesn't budge much. It just clumps. If it does shrink and swell, then when it dries out and wettens, it will expand and contract, and that's okay. That's tolerable to a percentage, but like I said, if you look at the evolution of the plant, it evolved in a subtropical climate with lots of compost, and it did not evolve in clay. Okay, and so it can tolerate clay, but it'll thrive in compost. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool.
So it's something that's would be smart to utilize.
Yeah, and it's good to have a small composition of clay. I wouldn't do more than 5% clay, and it needs to be small particles. You know, if it's a big chunk of clay, the root's not going to go through that.
For sure.
Yeah, and that brings me to aeration. You know, a lot of people aerated this year. When you aerate soil that is made out of clay and salt, you're compacting it, okay? If you're aerating and mixing in organic matter, that is helping to aerate the soil, but it can still compact based on how you aerated it. So in Utah, I recommend people dig out a trench, have it be your long, you know, bowl trench, right? Squares are really good for cannabis for how the roots spread over circle scoops, right? And if you can fill that with compost, that's your best situation. And it sucks because, you know, we're doing startup businesses. We paid a lot of money. We're paying a lot of money to get going. You don't want to pay for soil. But I'm telling you, if you start off with good soil, in the long run, economically, you're a lot better off. You spend less money on nutrients, and you get more biomass of a higher quality, and you're profiting more than you would if you didn't. So I'm a big soil fan.
Does your soil get better that way, like every year, better and
Yes.
better, or does it? You need to do more
If you keep it
purple?
alive, It will, and if you have the right setup, it'll stay alive all by itself. So if you have those cover crops on top, that'll maintain the humidity throughout the soil, right? If you start off with a lot of compost, you allow worms to be in there, you're gonna have a lot of activity, biological activity, bacteria, fungi, and you can also inoculate that soil with bacteria and fungi. There are products which sell them. I'm developing a product like that that is specific to cannabis agriculture. So far, nobody has made one that is just for cannabis. It's generalized. I've been doing a lot of microbial ecology research this year with my research mentor at UVU, and what I'm finding is that those communities, they vary not just based on the variety of cannabis. So one variety's microbial community composition can be drastically different from another one, but also based on the soil you're using, it can vary drastically, and the impacts they have can vary drastically. So it's super complicated, and it's all based on where you are, what the soil is like, where you are. That information is publicly available, by the way. I'm always saying it wrong. NCIS, GCIS. I'll have to post a link for you guys. If you grab my flyer, I have a link for it on my site where you can
Also,
look at the soil
not to interrupt you, but if you have your
Yeah.
phones with you, take a picture of this slide or enter the information in so you can follow up with Ty on any of these
Yeah.
questions you have.
You guys can reach out to me anytime. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Just make sure you get Tyler in that picture too.
Spacing out. Yeah, I'm a big cannabis fan. I don't know if I finished my story about Grace. Anyways, she had advanced MS and other degenerative disorders, and I worked with her for a couple of weeks at first, you know, and decided we had to destroy their plant material, start all over. We started all over, got their system a lot more sanitary, better humidity regulation. Their phenotype was really thick. The nugs were just massive, and so you had to actually modulate the humidity. You had to go up and down to allow dry cycles to kill some of the pathogenic fungi that was growing inside of it. So this phenotype is really susceptible to pathogenic infection of fungi, right? So we had to adapt their cultivation to that, and anyways, we did an extract for Grace, and after we cultivated her 99 plants she had with her green card, we infused it into oils, which we then put in the foods that she was able to eat. And after 3 weeks, I watched this woman, when I met her, she was just shaking like crazy, couldn't even say her name, in a wheelchair, you know. And 3 weeks after having her oils, when I showed up to work one day, she was walking around in her garden with her kids, and it just blew my mind that it could have that much impact, you know, and that's why I came back to school to try to learn more about it.
I just real quick, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But my husband knows this guy from high school, and he was working, he felt like he was going blind. And you tell the story.
He had an ulcer that broke and he bled to death actually, and they brought him back. But
Yeah, that's good.
but a year or so later, he started going blind, and he lost his job at this school. He was an FFA teacher. He
Oh,
lost
yeah.
his job, and then he lost his driver's license. Well, his sister, who was my sister-in-law, but they had CBD oil. She took him some drops of CBD oil just to see if it would make him just feel better. Well, he didn't know. He started putting it in his eyes. He said, "Man, it burned like."
Oh, yeah.
But
I don't know if it's
That's
supposed
when
to
you
go
know
in
it's
your eye.
burning.
Yeah.
he has his driver's license back now,
Ooh.
and he can see.
That's
Oh, wow.
amazing.
And I,
He swears it was
yeah,
from that.
he
Wow.
come and he wanted to start getting
That's
CBD
super
oil
crazy.
from me.
Does he still
drop it in his eye?
Yeah, and I think a lot of
Yeah,
us
he
have
still
stories
does.
like
That's
that.
it, even though it's
It's in there, yeah.
And I think we need to talk about stuff like that here in Utah, because I think that's what changes the minds of people who are a little bit conservative. That's what happened in Colorado. The biggest cultivators I met there were very conservative Christian people, and that's what's going to happen here. Okay, it doesn't matter your background. If you're wanting to make money, or you have someone affected by a medical condition that cannabis could help, that's who you're going to see leading the industry here in the next couple of years. Yeah.
You know, I can't guarantee that's what made his eyes get better, but.
Yeah.
You know, I can't.
Hard to
it's-
say, right?
it's-
I'm excited for the impacts that it could have on opioid addiction. I have a lot of friends I grew up with who are dead now or in jail
Yeah.
that could have some better options than what we currently have in the States, I think. And there's a lot of research in South America and Europe on the impacts of opioid mitigation with cannabis alkaloids and
Bud on it. I mean, it will
Are you
work as
finding
well.
like different trends as far as like pests and stuff in different areas?
yeah. Indoor, you see a lot more of the powdery mildew. Outdoor, not so much because of the UV radiation and the oxygen that you get outside. Outside, you're seeing a lot of pests. Totally depends on where you live. Also, outdoor, you're getting a lot of wind contamination, especially in southern Utah, places where there's a lot of wind and sand in the soil. One of the pictures on my slide, the guy had been just blasted week after week with high winds, and we had to wash his buds off. Interestingly, that can contaminate with fungi and bacteria. There's lots of mites in Utah. There's different predatory worms, grasshoppers, deer, teenagers.
Teenagers.
Watch out for them.
No, Ungo Hemp had a few plants stolen.
Yeah,
So,
there's
but
been a few reports in Salt
yeah,
Lake on
and,
that
yeah,
too.
they're done pacing. So, and
Oh,
like you know
man.
when it's teenager, when there's like 10 acres and only 10 plants
Yeah.
missing, and you're like, you guys didn't even take them at the right time. You didn't even know how to cure them. But that's like, it's like you don't even know what you're doing. So why are you touching it? Like,
Be aware of guerrilla warfare. It's a part of this industry that most
Yeah.
people aren't, haven't realized exists, and people will show up in the middle of the night with trucks and hedge clippers and leave with everything. Yeah,
They do the same
it'll
thing to cattle
happen.
farmers. It's
So just
sucks,
don't tell
but
anybody
it's-
where or if you're doing anything.
The cops will show up too.
Yeah, yeah. But just show them your permit. They're your friends.
Yeah, they're good.
Hopefully.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I'm gonna. hand
Listen,
it
I
off.
wanted to give a special thanks to Tyler. It's his daughter's birthday party today, and he made his time to come out here in the snow and stuff. But he's a wealth of wisdom. I'm glad you guys got his information. If
honor.
not, be sure to come up and get some more from him. I'm
Thank
gonna
you
have
for hosting this
yeah,
event.
thanks,
Seriously.
man. We'll do more of this kind of stuff, and you'll
Yeah.